This version of the simulator game is going to introduce variables. A couple major changes are that we are only going to have bees, so each student will represent a bee when we play this game. We're also going to introduce some new equipment. Each student will also get a dice, and instead of students being the flowers, we're now going to use a box or a pouch to hold all our tokens in there. So we're going to introduce a little bit of probability in this game, which is a great little math lesson as well. The only difference for this one is you can have any colored token in a pouch, except we are going to use two tokens. They could be black or blue or a different color than all the other tokens to represent one of the variables. And then we just want one singular token as well that's going to go in any of the bags to represent a major variable. And we'll explain those in the next steps. Gameplay is very similar to the last game we played, where the bees are going to be pollinating flowers, but now we're going to introduce the variables that the students learned about in the last jigsaw. So the first thing is habitat loss. The students will see this right away because there are going to be only a quarter amount of the flowers there were during the first game, and they're going to be spread much further and wider apart. The second one is going to be climate change. This is where the dice come in. Students are going to roll the dice, and if they roll a 1 or a 2, that's going to represent a delayed winter or major climate change, so the bees can't leave the hive. So that's going to be something they have to roll before they're allowed to leave the hive to go pollinate the flowers. So if they roll a dice and get released, they're just going to go and they're going to pollinate the flowers and transfer, just like last time, going from flower to flower, dropping off the one pollen token and taking up another one. Except they're going to be doing this from just a bag or a box right beside the flower. There's no flower giving it to them. Now it's time to introduce the pesticide variable. This is the fun one because if you remember, there should be two tokens in each box or pouch that represent a pesticide. When the bee goes to pollinate, remember it's a random grab from a bag, but there's a possibility they may grab a pesticide token. When that happens, they're going to take that token. And the bad news is we know that pesticides affect a bee's homing, which means that student/bee is going to be out of the game and they can no longer pollinate. So if they get that one token, they're instantly out of the game because that takes away some pollination and that bee eventually will not be able to make it back to the hive and die. So they'll be out of the game. Remember, if too many students pick up a pesticide token, that can lead to CCD, the colony collapse disorder. You can decide how many tokens that could be for your classroom. Maybe it's 4, because if the colony doesn't have any worker bees, then it simply just collapses and dies. Finally, we're going to introduce our last variable called the Varroa Mite variable. This one is deadly, and that's why there's only one token in the entire class set of tokens. So there's a good chance no bees will even pick up this token, but there is a chance that they will. When they do pick up that token, what's going to happen is they just put it in their pocket. Although if they infect the hive, technically bees become weaker and the pollination isn't good, but that's not going to work for the simulation, so just have them hang on to it. Gameplay ends when the timer goes off, and you do the same thing. Go back to the flowers, see all the different types of tokens that were deposited beside the flower, and use the tally graph again to tally up, was there more pollination? Was there less pollination? The kicker is, when you go back to the hive and bring all the tokens back, you have to ask all your bees, did anyone get the dreaded Varroa Mite token? Unlike a colony collapse disorder, this does greatly affect the hives because the parasite will infect the larvae, and then bees can also transport it to other hives, making it almost more deadly. Thus, what happens eventually is not only do you have one hive collapse, there's a possibility of many hives collapsing. And that's how you play the version 2 of the pollinator simulation game. Be sure to have a great discussion about how the variables affected pollination and how it affected the bee population.